Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We are extremely excited to be running this with our partners, the Port of Dover. And the webinar's title is How to Integrate Artificial Intelligence, so AI, and Digital Twins effectively into day-to-day operations. This is a really important topic. I think there's been a lot of discussion about the technology, sort of how the technology works and how we can develop it to go further. There's been, I suppose, less conversation around the practical side. How do we actually use these technologies day to day in operational environments? And today's webinar is going to talk about exactly that. We're going to talk about the deployment that Entopy and the Port of Dover have worked on at the Port of Dover. So we're going to focus more on the practical side, less about technology and more sort of practical example. I will shortly introduce our speaker today, and then I'll run through a few slides. So these slides are really just to sort of set the scene and provide a bit of context. I won't dwell on them too much, and we'll get into the discussion as soon as possible. I appreciate that's what most people are here for. So I will not keep you from that. And then there will be an opportunity to ask questions. We'll leave about 10-15 minutes towards the end of the session for that. So if you do have questions, pop them into the Q&A box. There's a feature here on Zoom that allows you to do that, and we'll work through those questions at the end. We are going to start hot on the hour mark. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. However, this webinar is being recorded. So those that have registered will receive a recording link shortly after the webinar closes, so you'll get to watch it back. If you've missed anything, if you've joined halfway through, you can catch it all. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself first. I'm Toby. I'm the founder and CEO at Entopy. I will be the host today, so the sort of mediator or moderator, I suppose, is the sort of official title on these sorts of things. But I'm extremely lucky to be joined today by Simon Revell, who is the digital program manager at the Port of Dover, and has been working with us for about a year, so taking over on the Entopy stuff and looking across many really complicated but fascinating projects. So Simon, for our audience, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, maybe a bit about your background and your role at the Port of Dover. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Toby, and hi to everybody on the call today. So as Toby said, I'm digital program manager at the Port of Dover. I've been here for just over a year, so I'm still relatively new to the port and the maritime sector. Before here, I was at a Fortune 100 global pharmaceutical company for about 25 years. I worked on various systems during that time. The last 10 years, I worked on developing big global digital marketing platforms, but I've worked on systems for research and development in the pharmaceutical context and things like that. And yeah, I've basically spent the last year working on some really exciting stuff at the Port of Dover with Toby and some other technology partners as well. We've been doing all sorts of things with AI and other technologies, and we'll probably get into some of that when we get into the proper session. But thanks for inviting me along today, Toby. Appreciate it.
Bro, thanks, Simon. And just before we go any further, there's a couple of announcements. So first up, Simon, you're speaking on another webinar tomorrow on similar topics with Innovate UK. So I'm sure we can sort of put something out to notice everyone of that. And over the next couple of weeks, so Entopy next week is at Cambridge Tech Week and also London International Shipping Week, and we'll be at the BPA conference in October. So if you are attending any of those events, please reach out to me or my colleagues. We'd love to connect and have a chat. Okay, so some context, some scene setting. So when you all registered for this webinar, we asked you to fill out a very short survey. It was regarding the barriers to adopting digital twin. And we gave 6 options. So lack of internal expertise or understanding, uncertainty around ROI or business case, resistance to change or organizational alignment. Maybe there's too many technology options, so it's unclear where to start. There was an option in there that allowed you to say we're already using digital twin or AI, but want to go further. And finally, difficulty accessing or integrating data. The registrations have been strong for this, and participants were able to answer multiple of these options. This is a good sample, and it shows kind of two sort of standouts: lack of internal expertise and uncertainty around ROI. I think this is quite interesting. I think these two aspects are linked. They're connected. I think when we think about both AI and digital twin, they can mean different things to different people. So AI, for example, many people just associate it with ChatGPT or Gemini or one of those kind of tools. But of course, there's much deeper. Well, there's much more depth to AI than that. You can use traditional machine learning models to predict aspects, computer vision systems to look through cameras, for example. And the same can be said for digital twin. You know, for some people, it's a 3D digital replica of a thing. For others, it's a simulation. Concept of digital twin to orchestrate data from lots of different systems and artificial intelligence. So this concept of ontology. So with that kind of complexity and variety, combined with perhaps a little bit of internal learning and understanding to go through, it can sometimes be a bit difficult to land on really clear use cases that focus on the business and the business need as opposed to the different technologies. So I can see how these two things can marry up to be quite prominent. Too many technology options, for example, is also quite strong. So I thought those survey results were quite interesting, and we wanted to share them. The Port of Dover, so I would imagine the majority of people that are watching this are aware of the Port of Dover, but for those that don't know, it is the UK's busiest international ferry port. The scale of the operation is absolutely phenomenal. Each year, 1.6 million tourist vehicles travel through the port. That's 11 million passengers, nearly 2.5 million freight vehicles. And yeah, the port and its colleagues do an amazing job to handle this volume of throughput. If the Port of Dover were, it's of course it's a major artery of the UK, accounting for something around a third of the UK's trade with the EU. So if the port were to stop or pause, it would cause significant disruption across UK supply chains and travel. So a very, very important location, a very, very important port, and it has its own docu-series. So recently, the Port of Dover had a 6-part docu-series on Channel 4, which I believe has been it's been very successful and has been commissioned for a second season. I think I'm allowed to say that. I can see you nodding, Simon. So yes, so a fantastic port and location. It's challenged, I suppose, by that throughput, the demand, but also geography. You have the sea on one side and the cliffs of Dover on the other. So access is constrained, infrastructure and space is tight. The roads into the Port of Dover are constrained. So what you can see here is an image of the port, and right in the centre of the screen is what's called the buffer zone. So this is an area of the port that is designed to hold traffic whilst processing through the port. Now, what's interesting about the Port of Dover is it has juxtaposed controls. So visitors through the Port of Dover will go through border control prior to check-in. So that's the opposite way round to what people would be familiar with at an airport, for example. So the buffer zone has a really important role, holding that traffic away from surrounding areas, surrounding roads and residential areas, to ensure that the surrounding areas of the port are not impacted. As traffic goes through the Port of Dover, as it's processed, it finally arrives at the loading area where vehicles wait to embark on their outbound ferries. And we can see a picture of the ferries here. There's at peak around 50 ferry sailings a day. So again, the scale of the operation is absolutely phenomenal. And DFDS, P&O and Irish Ferries are the ferry operators that operate out of the port. So together with the Port of Dover, we have built an AI-enabled digital twin that is there to provide dynamic predictive intelligence to operators. The digital twin at a very high level comprises multiple what we call AI micro models across the strategic road network of the port, so all the way up to the Dartford crossing. And these models predict traffic flows and work together with real-time data around, accidents and roadworks and so on, to dynamically predict traffic arrivals to the port. And that helps operators or it informs decisions around traffic management. Now, what's important here, and for the context of this webinar, is kind of how we've got there. And so we followed a pretty clear process. We started small. So back in 2023, we engaged with the Port of Dover and started with a very small and focused deployment, specifically on freight traffic. This was supported by the Freight Innovation Fund, so a Connected Places Catapult led program that de-risked the deployment very much for the Port of Dover and helped us to move quite quickly and set up those initial feedback loops. Then through 2024, we iterated, developed and expanded that digital twin. We refined functionality, we expanded the intelligence to cover tourists and coaches and integrated other data sources. And then from the start of this year, it's gone into full production. Operating at, supporting the 24/7 operation. We have monthly touch points and reviews to look and monitor progress. And continuously work to improve the intelligence that's being provided. There's just a sort of graphic of kind of what these things can look like as we iteratively expand, and there's the image of the dashboard up in terminal control. So that hopefully sets some context for the conversation that we're about to have. Before we go into that discussion, Simon, I just wanted to get your thoughts, I suppose, on the survey results. Did anything particular stand out to you in these?
We're familiar with all of them, I would say, Toby. Nothing stands out as much. I was just kind of looking through as you were going through and thought, yep. So no surprises, really. This is obviously quite common. We've seen all of this. I'm not saying we've got answers to all of it, but as we get into discussion, we'll definitely touch on some of these, I'm sure.
Yeah, fantastic. So as we kick into that conversation, I suppose the first question that I wanted to ask was around the kind of key steps and considerations. So from your perspective, from the Port of Dover's perspective, what are the key steps and considerations when integrating AI and digital twin into an operational environment?
The first thing I want to say is actually before we even talk about like the integration thing is some of the stuff that has to happen up front, which was referenced in some of the bar chart stuff you had up there. One thing I will say about Port of Dover is we're very much on a journey. I mean, we really feel like we're on a journey with these kinds of technologies. They're still new, they're still fresh. We're still trying to figure out, you mentioned AI. What type of AI? There's lots of different branches of AI. Exactly what capabilities are out there and how might they kind of marry to some of the business challenges and opportunities that we have in Port of Dover. So really the last 2 years for us has been initially kind of a journey of discovery. We've done work with yourselves. You said it there. We started relatively small. And we've done other pilots as well. So I think initially I would say that start small, as you said. I would definitely encourage people to try and just try some POCs and pilots and things and start quite small. Just get a sense of the different capabilities and what they can do for you as a business. I will say we've been really, really fortunate as a port because we've had lots of support from Innovate UK. I think Innovate UK, Toby, they're like the parent of the catapult. I'm not sure about that, but we've had a lot of support from them in the form of they funded some of our pilots and POCs. They've done match funding with us. They've done introductions for us to companies that they believe can solve business problems, challenges, opportunities that we have. So I really do want to give them a big shout out because they've been very, very instrumental for us just to get our heads around what is all of this stuff and what is it capable of doing and where does it kind of fit in with what we need to do. I'll also say that we've done some stuff with universities as well. So we're very lucky. We've got two great universities on our doorstep, Canterbury Christchurch University, University of Kent. So we've done various collaborations with them. Universities are always really keen to, in my experience anyway, to kind of partner on things like this, because they, it's a real kind of win-win. We look at them as our R&D almost in some instances. But we've also done some big collaborations with the University of Manchester, University in Plymouth, and so on. So that's kind of given us a really, really good grounding over the last 2 years to really understand the different types of capability that are out there, try a few things, see what works for us, some things that didn't quite work for us, or we need to go back and rethink and so on. So that would be the first thing. Just consider you're on journey. Try and get some awareness of what these things are. Please don't do that thing that we're very good at doing in technology circles, where we get great new technologies come along and we all get excited about it, and then we try and apply it to too many things that it's not suited for, and then everybody starts to sour on it. There's that great thing, and I forget the name of it, the Gartner technology adoption curve, where it kind of shows the sentiment around new technologies, and you go up to the peak of expectations. Everybody's so excited, and they're trying to do all of these things, and there will be things it's not suited to, and then it kind of drops off. And then the hype cycle. Yeah, somebody, Nicole just said that. Thanks, Nicole. That kind of annoys me and upsets me, because how often have we had really great capabilities and technologies come along, and just simply because we've been in a rush to show the world, hey, we're doing this, we've not used them in the right context, and we've kind of soured opinion on them. So do your homework, try some things, try small things first of all, do some pilots. We've done things that have lasted for a month, and we've learned so much from them, and it's really informed our kind of technical strategy going forward. I think the other thing I would say is just make sure that you've got a really, really crisp articulation of the business problem or opportunity that you're looking to address. And that kind of relates to that hype cycle again. Don't just apply it because everybody else is doing it. What is it that you're trying to solve for? What is it you're trying to do? And just make sure that is well articulated up front, and it's a legitimate thing as well, right? There's actually a value to the thing that you're going to do. We were quite lucky in this instance, in the work we've done with Toby, because he articulated it really well. We have a lot of vehicles, traffic coming into the port. We're space constrained. We have, like, what was it, Toby, 50 departures a day or whatever. So we have ferries depart in more frequently than buses depart in most kind of villages around the country, right? There's an awful lot that's going on. And interestingly, at Port of Dover, we are largely a turn up and go port. And that means that majority of people are not pre-booking. They just turn up when they want to turn up, and they pay for the ticket when they arrive at the port. So for us, the reason we were doing it, it was pretty clear. It was really easy to articulate that. And so I know it's not always as straightforward and as simple as that, but really think about, frame the business challenge. What is it you're trying to do?
But then the ability the way that you did it was very much start small, see what happens. And it was also kind of it wasn't like a radical shift to how things are done already. It was an addition to, so it wasn't a complete change process, wouldn't you say?
No, I agree. And I think, as you know, Toby, we subsequently have, and even now, we've got a meeting in a couple of weeks where we're going to get into this even more. We've had subsequent discussions around, okay, so now we have this capability. Now, how are we going to ground this in the day-to-day? And that was one of the things I was going to talk about, because that's definitely, actually, I'm going to take a step back, because one thing I do want to say about this whole new area of technology, and maybe this is just me, I come from a very classical software background. I've been in IT for 30 odd years. So I've had a lot of experience of building and deploying like enterprise systems or what have you. And there's a lot of similarities and parallels with how you would approach traditional technology deployments compared to this, but it's not exactly the same. It really isn't. So some of the things I might say might seem really kind of obvious in some respects, but things like the point you made there, about how you actually kind of ground it, that actually wasn't a focus for us initially on this, because we were so focused on the big hairy problem. How do we generate these kind of predictive analytics to give us data where no data exists? How do we go solve that problem? So it was only later on that we actually start to have those discussions about, okay, now how do we really make sure that this thing that we've pulled together works within the context of day-to-day operations. And what is it that those people that manage day-to-day operations, what is it that they need? What do they need to see? How do we need to display it? What kind of prompts? What kind of color coding and so on? And so we probably got to that later on. I mean, we got to it. We had a workshop, Toby. We got some great feedback and input from our operations officers here at the port. We actually did a redesign around user experience, user interface, and things like that. We're going to do some tweaks to that in a couple of weeks' time. So yeah, and a lot of what I'm saying today, by the way, is the benefit of hindsight as well, just as we've kind of learned as we go along. One thing I did want to say though, Toby, which I think is so crucial for so many of these types of applications and initiatives, is to think about upfront what your data requirements are. It's a cliche to say it, but that, you know, we have the saying, data is the fuel of AI, and equally digital twins and simulations and models and things like that. And we definitely had some missteps where we maybe overestimated our ability to get the data that we needed to fuel these things. And you know, we wasted time on that, quite frankly. We made your jobs more difficult, and that I know that as well. So we now have a new mindset, which is when we're considering these types of projects going forward, and we think about the dependencies that we have, probably number one dependency is, what data do we need to fuel this thing? You know, what historical data do we need to enable the modeling to be done? What kind of real-time data inputs do we need for the, you know, to make the digital twin sing? And then kind of work backwards. You know, does that data even exist today? If it does, who owns it? Where's the source of it? Can we get to it? Do we, you know, we need to go and buy an API to something or a subscription, and then how do we pull it into our data lake, and then how do we safely make it available to the modelers, and all of those kinds of things. And if the data doesn't exist, what is it we need to do to get ahead of that, to enable that data to be collected? And, you know, we have projects going on at the moment where we're calling them enablement projects. And their end result isn't really going to kind of move the needle too much at the moment, but they're enabling us to collect the data that we know we're going to need to do bigger, highfalutin things. So yeah, don't underestimate the data. That has tripped us up more than once. We're getting better at it, but I just consider that up front and almost treat that as a project in its own right. How are you going to go get the data and things like that? The other thing, this is the last thing on that question, Toby, was just around. I was going to talk about testing, but I think it's more than testing. These things that you know we build in this space, by their very nature, they're very sophisticated and complex. So you definitely, you know, you can do your traditional testing, but this isn't like classic enterprise application development and deployment, where, you know, you put a huge emphasis on testing to make sure that functionally the thing is doing the thing that you've written up in your user stories or your functional specification or whatever it may be. And you know that when you've passed the testing stage and you put it into production, high confidence is going to do what you expect it to do. And there may be the odd bug that comes up. There may be the odd kind of functional enhancement that gets deployed and things like that. But once it's out there, it's out there. These applications are not like that. And it's not that, and I don't want to suggest there's loads of onerous work that you have to do here, but you've got to be constantly kind of vigilant to what it is doing, what it's saying, what it's telling you. And I would say be curious as well. We've had a few instances where, and I will say, I know within Entopy, Toby, you do various kind of monitoring and, you know, comparing of, you know, what was it we predicted versus what we subsequently got from the actual data. In our case, that's the very manifest data. We do something similar internally, not as highfalutin as Entopy, but we do have a curiosity. You know, we're kind of looking at the performance of the models, and where we see a variance, instantly curious, why would that be? And what we've tried to encourage internally, we actually have set up a lead user group, and they have direct access to the Entopy product development team. It's not something we abuse. We're not trying to raise loads of change requests in there and get loads of development done and stuff like that. It's more, hey, you know, we saw this, and you know, we're curious why this happened. And what we find is, and this is the one of the kind of nice things about where we played AI and applied AI in this instance and other instances, it kind of actually starts to shine a light on areas of your business operations that maybe you hadn't necessarily thought about before. I had that comment, not on this project, actually, we did another AI quite recently, and it was kind of throwing all sorts of things up. And that was the comment, it's got us thinking about areas that we never thought about before. We never thought about that, never thought that was even a thing. We had an instant, Toby, didn't we, a couple of months ago where somebody in our operations team had reported, look, there's a variance in the predictive figures. And I think it was just after midnight or something like that. And the AI is suggesting one thing, but what we're actually seeing is something different. And we had a discussion with some folk in the ops team, and they said, oh, okay, that the AI is correctly predicting that, a percentage of vehicles are going to come down to the port. But what the AI doesn't know, or it didn't know, was that there's a percentage of those that have got early crossings in the morning. So they'll go and stay in a hotel in town overnight. So we don't directly see them. They're here. They're just not on our premises yet. It was like, okay, didn't know that, So I think just kind of be vigilant and don't just assume that this thing can possibly know every kind of facet, every detail. It's something that you'll build on. You'll improve it as you go. So that was quite a lot, Toby. Hopefully that was,
there's a lot to
that
unpack
question
there, Simon. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points that I suppose I wanted to just zoom in on a little bit. So the work that was done around dashboarding, so the intelligence went up, and actually those dashboards have gone through multiple iterations, and the involvement, the collaboration between the teams, because at the end of the day, the operators, the guys in terminal control, know that operation better than we will ever understand. We're providing intelligence to them, and they've really instructed how they want to see it, how it can be the most effective, and they've directed the reshaping of that dashboard, which has been a really, really, really positive thing. And obviously, we're continuing to expand on that. And the other point, just around iterative development. I mean, your point there around the hotels. But it's also, it plays out through, it's like, I always say, it's like peeling an onion is a horrible phrase, right? But I can't think of a better one off the top of my head. But as you predict one thing, it opens up a whole bunch of new questions. And maybe that points you in a direction of, actually, we need data over here. Some of the infrastructure that you guys are putting in now is only going to improve the model. But I think the fact that we were able to, collectively get to a point where, okay, this is up, it's doing something, and it's now shining a light on those areas, and then we can iteratively expand. I think that appreciation for the need to go iteratively across digital twin deployments, not kind of utopian, I'm going to, bring this software in and then tomorrow I'm going to have intelligence everywhere. It's actually a journey, as you keep reiterating. I think they're really, really important points. I suppose just moving through the docket, the next thing I kind of wanted to kind of get your thoughts on was really around the practical use of the technology. So we've spoken a bit about how we've got to where we've got to. I suppose now it's really understanding, how's the Port of Dover practically using, the AI and the digital twin technology to improve day-to-day decision making.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna tackle this one in two parts, because and it's going to be on the theme, we're on a journey, right? So in terms of what we're doing today, as I said previously, very kind of clear kind of need that we had. So we are using the capability currently in two ways. We're using it for, I guess I would call it like situational awareness. What's about to hit the port? And what does that mean for us in terms of what kind of capacity do we need to make available? When I talk about capacity, that typically means things like, how many lanes do we need to open up? How many people do we need on the ground? What kind of input do we need to put into our kind of partner stakeholders on site? That all have kind of different responsibilities in terms of that traffic flow. And that is, I refer to that as short range planning, a bit clunky, but effectively what is happening in the next hours to come, right? And what do we need to be prepared for? We did some further work, and I will say actually, Toby, because you kind of referenced this, but at Port of Dover, we're quite obsessed about different categories of traffic. So we typically categorize in three. We can think about freight vehicles, and freight is fairly consistent through the year. They typically don't book ahead because they're backwards and forwards every week or whatever, don't quite know what time they're going to be here. We think about coaches, and then we think about tourists, and tourists is everybody else. It's cars, people going on holiday, camper vans, and what have you. So when we work with Entopy, we're always thinking about those three categories because they each have kind of different nuances in terms of how we prepare for them and they transit through the port. So the bit that we did initially was to start small in terms of let's focus on one of those categories, and then we added others. We then did this short range planning that I mentioned. One of the latest bits we've worked on is a more longer range planning. So let's think beyond today. Let's think about days ahead. No, let's think about weeks ahead. So we can use this data to inform our resource forecasting and planning and things like that. The bit that I think is still a lot of potential, a lot for us to do, and we have done some work on, is where we kind of start to kind of marry that sense of what is coming and when with what impact is that actually having on specific areas of the port. So we've done one piece with Entopy. We haven't gone live with this, and that's for reasons outside of this project. That's just about other stuff that's happening in the port. So it wasn't conducive to do it yet. But we modeled like a sensitive area of the port in terms of throughput. And what that means is we have the ability to kind of project ahead and look at what volumes are going to do to that area of the port at any given hour, day in the future. And there's various parameters we can play around with, like, okay, if we increase lane capacity, what does that do for backlog, and so on and so on and so on. And I think that's the area of huge opportunity for us. One of the reasons we haven't been able to go much further ahead with that is that it comes back to that data constraint that we've got. We just know that we've got to do more work on collecting actual real world data, and that's a big project that I'm focused on right now. We're starting to deploy digital stage gates through the port so that we can start to measure traffic through the different stages. We can start to collect historical data. We can start to look at dwell times and the impact of volumes and all of that cool stuff. But yeah, so I think we've got the first two bits. The last area I talked about is that's where all the potential is for me. And it sounds like this is my get out clause, but this is where the journey analogy comes in. We've realized, oh boy, we need to get some more data to inform what actually is happening in these areas, because then we can inform the models and things.
Yeah, I think you've just described the layers, though, the kind of here and now situational, longer term planning, and then longer term kind of intervention impact analysis, and you kind of need to go in that sort of order. But in the kind of situational awareness and planning, there is always a human handoff, and I think that's really important. This intelligence is there to be used by human operators to inform their decisions, right? It's never been spoken about in any other guise.
No, I mean we're in the realm at the moment. This is we see these as assistants, right? We have other AI in the port at the moment, and it's a similar thing. It's doing the heavy lifting of trying to collect data and present it in a meaningful way. And it's doing to be assistance to the people that are doing the operations day to day. So I think that's a key point in this.
And do you see, because I suppose there's a lot of work as well. You mentioned around some of the stakeholders around the port and within the ecosystem, and the potential, well, how you're sort of using this intelligence, I suppose, to influence them. I mean, I suppose, would you be able to talk a little bit more about that, just in terms of how the intelligence can, because it is an ecosystem, isn't it, the Port of Dover? There's a lot of stakeholders operating within it, doing different functions.
Absolutely. Now, at the moment, we don't make this kind of data available to anybody outside of our operational center, and there's a good rationale for that, because at the moment, there's still a level of interpretation that goes on there, whereby they can translate it into, okay, that means we need to do this, so we need to go talk to this stakeholder and advise them on that. I think as we get more sophisticated with that, one of the aspirations we've got is like, let's start to break out the data so that we're not having to kind of do that almost translation, right? We're not quite there yet. We're still kind of understanding exactly how we interpret and what that breaks down into in terms of prompts and inputs into other kind of parts of the port and stuff like that. But yeah, this is the thing, right? It's all there. You can see where this is going to go. It's just we're not quite there yet, right?
Yeah.
And we're doing it in these stages. And I think within the port, we just want to make sure as we progress to the next stage, we're at a level of maturity that we're confident and comfortable in what we're sharing, that it's kind of got the right interpretation on it. It's presented in the right way. I mean, we already kind of went through this exercise internally to kind of right shape the way that the data are presented so it works for us internally. What we really want to do is not just assume that every other stakeholder needs it in the same form, because they won't. They definitely won't. So that is another thing that we've been thinking about. How do we kind of wrap this up in a way that's meaningful for them? Ultimately, we just want to make it as useful as we can possibly make it. We don't want people to have to kind of be thinking too much about it or interpreting it. So there's lots of potential.
I love it. It's good, and it's like you said, it's a journey and it continues.
Exactly.
But
Can't underline that enough. Yeah.
No, exactly. And I think just for those hearing this, I mean, if I was just to sort of paraphrase a little bit some of the stuff that's been going on, I mean, the use case very clear, right from the outset, iterative deployment. So starting small, iteratively expanding, recognizing, almost accepting, but paying a lot of attention to what data is actually available. How can that data be used to drive the outcomes that we want, but also recognizing that actually as you go through that journey, you might find different things along the way that you didn't necessarily know at the start that require new data and require you to iteratively expand. And then when applying that, hook it into existing processes and make sure that there is that really close collaboration with the human operators to utilize that intelligence and ultimately make decisions. I suppose just jumping through again, we've touched on some of these points, to be honest, Simon, as we've been going through. But one of the big things, I suppose, is it's not just about technology. It's not just about delivery. Sometimes adopting these technologies requires you to think about things outside of the kind of technology and delivery components. I suppose, what other things from the experience that you've had both within this project and other AI projects that you've got running, what things other than technology need to be considered?
So there's a lot actually, and in no particular order, right? I'm just going to kind of randomly talk about a few things. So I think we've already talked about how you communicate about the technology, and just to kind of quickly cover what I mean by that, it's quite simple stuff, really. There definitely are minds of thinking that AI is this magical thing that you're just going to kind of sprinkle it over, and it's just instant. It's just amazing. It'll just kind of perform miracles. And I think as we've kind of spoken about, there's some amazing capability there, some amazing things you can do, but you got to work it, right? So it's not often an instant thing. Sometimes it is, but often no. There's work that needs to be done to really kind of get the maximum benefit out of it. It's not just a thing you switch on. There's also kind of a counter to that. People that are quite distrustful of AI, and if they see, we put something out and it's not working as expected, it's almost like it reinforces this belief. This thing isn't doing what it needs to do. I had an incident quite recently, actually, not with Entopy, but another little bit of AI that we put out for a completely different application. And I was so glad that when I communicated it as a pilot, and I actually said the words, we're gonna put this out there, we're gonna try it, we're gonna refine it, and I'm gonna make it better. And initially we did have a few little teething problems. It wasn't quite prepared for some of the kind of edge use case things that happened in the port. But because I'd already kind of set that expectation that we expected that to happen, people were, when I went in, and I was quite apologetic, actually, I'm really sorry, it didn't catch that thing in exactly the right way. People were quite accommodating for that. We understood that, we understood this was a pilot. We understood it wouldn't kind of land and be, 100% accurate first time. It needs a bit of refinement. So that would be something to think about. Not that it relates to this particular application, because this hasn't been a concern, but data privacy, there's a lot that we do with AI where we're utilizing CCTV and ANPR and stuff like that. So we probably over-index on data privacy at the port. We don't actually collect a lot of private data, believe it or not. We don't actually know who people are that are coming through the port, but we are using CCTV to extract data, metrics and things like that, and ANPR and other sensor technologies. And so we tend to hyperfixate on data protection impact assessments, even when not really necessarily required. But the reason we're doing that is that this is such a new areas of technology. Even if it's just for our own peace of mind, we understand, that what we're doing is justified, that we're only collecting any personal data that we really need. We've got justification for it. We're not storing that data unnecessarily, and that we understand technically how all of these things fit together, and we understand the security data and so on. So didn't apply in this instance, but generally that would be kind of a go-to. I already talked about, the fact that, you need to have an ongoing relationship with the technology as well. And I wouldn't suggest that that was something as full on as like a continuous improvement, but that general kind of mindset is a good one to kind of get into. And I think we probably kind of inferred that point multiple times already. Two others around data. We did some work with you, Toby, last year where we really started to talk about and understand data ownership versus IP.
Yeah.
And I think initially we had quite loose definitions of that. But that was probably more just because we were kind of building this thing and understanding it. And I think from the port's perspective, we felt a lot better having sat down with you and walked through it and understood exactly, okay, data in is we own that, and this is how it can be used and so on. And just making sure that was kind of codified so that everybody understood, the parameters, what could and couldn't be used and where and in what context. This is very different from your classic traditional application development, because typically you buy a piece of tech and you kind of install it on-prem or on cloud or whatever. And when you talk about data, it's all your data, right? Because it's you that's putting it in there and it's you generate. This whole area doesn't necessarily work in that way, because there's different sources of data that are enabling and fueling the models and things like that. So I would just suggest don't overlook that. Just make sure that you understand it and that everybody is clear about who owns what and the conditions of use, because it'll make you much more confident in any of your kind of subsequent enhancements and dealings and things like that. The last one I want to touch on is around data literacy. Now this is I'm not suggesting we've done hardly anything with this yet in the port, but it has come up from our head of operations, who was in the video, Toby Therese.
Yeah.
And just this kind of realization that the nature of what we do in the workplace is changing. And so you talked about, okay, we're kind of putting data in the hands of our amazing operations officers who do a fantastic job, but now we're starting to give them, data and systems and things that assist them. And it's just that understanding that it requires a slight kind of change of skills and mindset, so we actually have been a couple of conversations internally about, how do we start to work on we're calling it data literacy. There's probably a better term for it, but it really is an indication that when you introduce these types of systems, maybe there are some additional skills and things that we need to think about internally. And one thing I will say that's great about what's happened in our terminal control, there are people in there that have I mean, they amaze me. They've become like Excel experts, and they show me these amazing analysis and things like that, where they're taking the data and they're doing their own kind of modeling and things like that. And it's really impressive and really, really good to see. So again, you know, we're just figuring this stuff out. I'm not suggesting we've done anything wholesale on that, but it's just like another interesting area, another interesting angle that we're starting to think about internally.
But I think, thank you for sharing all of that, Simon, because I think that the point is the scale of the Port of Dover's operation. I think this, you know, is a journey, but it's been a successful deployment of AI and digital twin that is actually being used to drive day-to-day decision making and the medium-term planning, and there is ambition to go further with it. I think these lessons, these experiences are exactly, well, I'm hoping that's exactly what our audience want to hear, to be honest. I didn't want to kind of come on and be all utopian. I actually wanted to get under the bonnet and say, look, this is how this stuff actually goes, right? So I think that's some amazing observations in there. I mean, from our point of view, I think the one thing that I'd just like to add, I suppose, is how important. So all of the considerations that you've made, particularly the data literacy and the data ownership pieces, I think are really important as well, and they're really important to kind of make sure that you're on the same page right from the outset. Because it just helps with that collaboration. But that's exactly what I want to speak about. Is that it's the collaboration that we've built. You know, when our team come down, that when we walk into the terminal control room, you know, it's you know, there's a dynamic there. You know, we're speaking, we're engaging, we're going through various things. They've already always got live and hot feedback for us. And I think that's so important to have that kind of symbiosis and real partnership, because that's ultimately what led to key things like the dashboard restructure, which has ultimately driven impact and use. But also the iterative expansion, like where are we going? We're both on this sort of kind of, you know, within this context, you know, no one thought about people stopping over overnight the night before, or turning up, and you know, so all of these sorts of things, this regular dialogue that we have has been so important in pushing these things forward. So yeah. Right. We are now at almost 20 past 11, so we've got about 13 minutes for questions. I've just pulled up. We've got quite a few in there already. I'm going to pick out the ones that I'm going sort of what's in front of me. So, Toby, we've heard about data availability. So there's a question straight to us, but I'm going to just skip that because I want to go to. Did you share? Okay, so this is an interesting one, Simon, for you. So AI is a new phenomenon, stroke tool, with new dynamics to leverage the benefits. How have you educated your C-suite to appreciate the real possibilities, provide leeway in the execution, and appreciate that failure is acceptable? And I think this is a really important point, because it's something that hasn't yet come up in the conversation, and that's the importance and the role of senior leadership in not just, you know, it's full spectrum, full organizational stack engagement to these projects is required. But I think this, Simon, perhaps gives you an opportunity. So the question again is, how have you educated your C-suite to appreciate the real possibilities, provide leeway in the execution, and appreciate that failure is acceptable?
Well, I think we're very fortunate in Portadown. I can't really quite answer this question the way you might want me to answer it, and I'll explain why. We actually have a CEO and an executive team that are very engaged in the opportunities and possibilities of technology. So that's kind of number one. So much so that I can't talk about it today, but there's some really exciting work that's taking place now. We're working on a new digital strategy for the port. And so that is something that's being, you know, encouraged, sponsored by our CEO and our executive team, and actually our board as well, are excited by that. So we kind of got a pass on. We didn't really have to convince them. The appetite, the expectation is already there. On the appreciate that failure is acceptable. One thing I think that was really useful for us is that this association that we've had with, the catapult funding and things that you mentioned, Toby, and Innovate UK, we've done a couple of knowledge transfer partnerships. And that's a really interesting way of kind of approaching this, because there's an element of, first of all, an element of shared risk in doing it that kind of way. But also, for instance, when you go into a knowledge transfer partnership, the thing that you're doing on that KTP is supposed to be an audacious stretch goal type thing. So there is an expectation built into that you may not achieve it, but hopefully you're going to learn a lot and achieve a bunch of things along the way. So because we've done so much of that over the last 2 years, we did a lot of pilots and POCs. We did a lot of stuff with computer vision, and I forget how many pilots we did in the end, something like 7 pilots or something like that. And I don't know, 2 or 3 of those didn't quite give us the results that we expected, but it didn't matter because the win was, but we've learned about the capability. Now we have a much greater understanding of where it's appropriate to apply it. So that just gave us this grounding, this foundation to be more sure in some of the technology choices and things that we've made and that we're going to be, thinking about in our digital strategy. So yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of pilots and POCs. I came from the pharmaceutical industry, as I said up front. There's a great diagram we used to have in my last company where they show this funnel, and the mouth of the funnel was huge and it had all these dots in it, and it was showing, some kind of mechanism versus some idea, and all these things colliding and ideas coming out of it. And then the funnel kind of got smaller as we kind of got into, say, early stage experiments and trials, and did a few of those and realized, yeah, it's not quite working for that. And then you refine it and you do some more experimentation. And at the end of it, you get something that's golden, that's really, really valuable. And that's essentially what I think we do in IT quite a lot. We kind of assume that everything is a surefire hit, and it isn't necessarily. So definitely kind of give yourself some space, just experiment and try things, and accept that there may be some things that don't go the full way. You may switch them off or whatever, but you're going to be learning as you go. So that was a little bit of a waffly answer, Jeremy, but hopefully that kind of gave you some sense of at least our experience inside Port Dover.
Thanks, Simon. I'm gonna and just to add to that, just again, the level of engagement right throughout the organization has been fantastic, but really just to kind of reiterate what you've just said, the culture, the mindset, the ambition from the senior leadership, from the exec team, to really push this stuff has been very, very evident, and I think enormously important. So yeah, it's been great. And just on that, there's one here. It caught my eye because it's got the word hairy in it, right? But it says you talked about the big hairy goal and the hype cycle. I think this maybe plays into that point. It says, how did you engage the hearts and minds of stakeholders that were perhaps not hyped by AI? And were more resistant to change? And if you don't mind, I'll just start this, because way back, so and I can probably answer one of the questions. There was a question around how long have we been engaged, so really from the summer of 2023. But I remember going down and speaking, the initial conversations were with some of your colleagues, some of your predecessors that must have a real shout out, because some of the work that they did really pushed this project forward. And the conversations with the technologist is very much around AI and the technology and what it can do, and our micro models approach, and so on and so forth. But as soon as you get into kind of an operational context, AI is less important. It's more about outcomes. It's more about what's this going to allow me to do. And so I think, just in terms of engaging hearts and minds, I think recognizing, I suppose, that different people have a slightly different perspective on what the technology is there for, right? Or what's interesting about it. But I would also stress that when we've really labored the point around iterative deployment, start small and so on. I think this plays into that point as well, because with AI, seeing is believing, right? There's so much hype around these technologies. And again, this is one of the reasons I wanted to have this webinar and focus the conversation around the points that we've spoken about, because we're not talking utopian. We're talking very practically about how this has been implemented and how we're using it and so on and so forth. But there's so much hype that you have to lead with evidential or demonstrable kind of capability, right? And that's how you win the hearts and minds of people that are not necessarily hyped by AI, as you put it. I don't know, Simon, do you have anything to add to that point?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I think, and by the way, I don't want to disparage anybody that you know that might not be convinced initially. One of the things that I always think is that stay humble, and what I mean by that is just like be open to kind of input and what people are feeling and thinking. And one thing that we've done recently, Toby, I forgot to mention this actually, because we kind of talked about this and realized, this is a bit of a best practice thing. I put out like an anonymous survey to the user group inside the port recently, and just asked for feedback and comments and things like that. And that was really, really, really useful. And what we found was that we weren't getting lots of negativity. We actually were getting lots of suggestions about, here's some areas that you could be looking at and things like that. So I think just be open to kind of accepting any input, because there's potential golden nuggets, irrespective of where it's coming from and what have you. So yeah, but I agree with you, Toby. I think just kind of developing it and showing success as you go along, that goes a long way, doesn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, no, 100%. There's a couple of, so we've got 4 minutes left. I'm sorry, we've got so many questions. I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, or we're not certainly. What what have been the biggest challenges in integrating AI and digital twins at the Port of Dover? This is to either. I will just give Simon a second just to digest that and just say that the so look, we came into this very, very clear goal, very clear direction, very clear and well-defined start point. So all of the kind of big boxes, as we put it, are ticked. Data is always the challenge with these things, and that's where I'm going to land. So, for example, the AI micro models that we've got deployed across the road network of Kent, they are using sensor data that is already on the road network, and some of those data sources can be a little bit tricky to work with. So we've actually had to, well, over the past few years, we've been developing technologies that allows us to overcome some of those things. So without turning this into a marketing thing, but the idea of being able to expand and fill in data sets has been a real point. But in the absolute absence of any data, that is a challenge. And Simon, we've referenced that as we've gone through the discussion. The other thing was making sure that we had strong validation data sets right from the outset that everyone kind of agreed with. So what we tried to do, or what we have done, is we've actually used the data set to validate the performance of the models. That is separate, if you like, to the data that we use to train the models, and separate from the inputs that go into the models. So we're using the kind of commercial, what did you call the data set? It's the port manifest data, the vessel.
Yeah, from the ferry manifest. Yeah.
Ferry manifest, yeah. So that's coming through, and that's really, we get that retrospectively. And that's the data that we're using essentially to validate. So getting those strong validation data sets that are kind of agreed upon is really important as well. So the biggest challenges in any AI and digital twin deployment in real world infrastructure is for us, from my perspective, it's always going to be data. But Simon, we've got 1 minute. I don't know if you can add.
I'm just going to say that we have this cliched saying in AI that data is the fuel of AI. It's a cliche because it's so true, and that would be my number one answer as well. Yeah, data.
Brilliant. Okay, so I am going to bring this to a close. Simon, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Audience, I hope you have found that insightful. I hope that's been useful. I mean, our goal was to produce a useful webinar and provide some practical examples, and hopefully we've done that. As I mentioned, those that have registered will receive a link to the recording of this webinar. But for now, thank you, Simon, and thank you all for listening. Bye bye.
Thanks, Toby.